Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Leaders Interview with Michael Ryan. Joining me today is Rebecca Howard, Head of Supplier Relationship Management at Coventry Building Society. Rebecca, would you like to introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yes, Michael, and thanks very much for speaking to me today. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Howard, and in my role as Head of Supplier Relationship Management, I look after Coventry Building Society suppliers after they've signed the contract. So I look after performance management, third-party risk elements, and ensuring that all of our suppliers complete all their governance commitments.
Okay. And one of the reasons we're going to talk for about 3 topics today, but one of the main reasons we're going to talk about is because you featured in Finance Transformation magazine last year. And you explained to me one of the things that I'm always tripping over, which is ESG. And every time somebody says to me ESG, I'll be scratching my head, what does the S stand for? We all know that the E is environment, and then we take it from there. And you wrote a fascinating article for me last year to explain the S. And you related it right down to what's going on at Coventry Building Society. You put it into effect. That's the first thing we're going to discuss. The second thing we're going to talk about, because we're both consultants or both former consultants, is the transition from what it's like from working for a Big Four consultancy into, should we say, working in the real world, as everybody tells me every time I go to work at a client. And then finally, we're going to talk about diversity and inclusion from the front line, so shall we say. So let's go back to the start there. We're going to have a little chat about ESG. Do you want to explain to the listeners, what is the S?
Yes, absolutely. These social elements, which can be interpreted in so many different ways, depending on the organization that is applying it. And I think there's a good reason for that, because when we look at the environmental elements and the governance elements, there's an awful lot of international standards that accommodate that. For the environment, people are talking about their carbon footprint, whether they have a science-based target, whether they're reporting in line with the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. There's an awful lot of consistency around reporting, whether it's to do with sort of carbon and becoming net carbon zero in the future, or whether it's to do with how we're managing waste or water or biodiversity. Governance is similar, lots of ethics issues in there, but ultimately we're talking about following rules, taxation, and things like even prompt payment of suppliers can fit in there as well. Now, social's much more broad. We're talking about colleagues, so the colleague experience, whether colleagues feel as if they have a sense of belonging at work, whether they feel as if they have a great workplace where they feel comfortable. There's equity, there's justice. People are fairly paid for the work they do, and they feel safe and supported in the workplace, as well as all of the other elements that might fit into social, about how the firm is supporting the community that they're working with, how they're helping talent and ensuring that candidates to the organization have a fair crack at getting a role, and that when talent is in the organization, they have great career programs, that talent is welcomed from all sections of society, whether that's apprentices, graduates, underrepresented groups, people who are doing a career move, returning to work after a break, and even people who are starting late careers or retirees returning into the workforce. Social elements accommodate all of this. Social elements look to diversity and inclusion as well. And they also look to the extent to which the firm engages more formally in with its workplace about a sort of, dialogue, so social dialogue, to what extent are the employees able to feedback on how they feel the workplace is running? Do we have unions, or do we have some sort of collective workers groups, so that workers can really get a sense of being part of the decision making in how organizations are deciding on what their strategy is, and ultimately so that power is more equitably shared out. And I think this is a fascinating area, Michael, because, just COVID had this huge effect on the social elements, partly for practical reasons, because obviously lots more people are hybrid working or working from home or working in different locations. But I think also employees expect a lot more from their workplace. I think once work was a place to fulfill professional, career goals, I think now colleagues at work are expecting work to feel more like a family, to have well-being offerings, to feel as if there are safe spaces to talk, to feel as if they're struggling in any way, that their colleagues will look out for them and help them. We have mental first aiders. In our organisation, we have lots of networks so that like-minded people can come together, whether that's people who are interested in music or people who are going through the menopause or fertility treatment, or people who have a particular sort of commonality with other colleagues, like, for example, they're part of the LGBTQ plus community. And I don't know if you found that as well, that the workplace feels quite different in terms of the employee expectation.
I think you're bang on right. The employee expectation has completely changed over the course of the last 2.5 years. And to be honest, that's a good thing. It's a good thing. I like to see, particularly whenever I'm managing large teams, I want to hear what they have to say. And it's very important when you're leading any kind of transformation program that you create the environment from which they can talk. And generally, my engagements can be like 6 to 9 months or 12 months long. So I'm in to do something and go out again. But it's great to see a business that's there that embraces this for the long term. This is business as usual for them. Do you have some examples around how Coventry Building Society are doing that and some of the experiences you've had since you joined them?
Absolutely, yes. So I think you're right about the importance of involvement. And in our organisation, we have regular sessions with our senior team. We call those our Coventry conversations, where employees get that opportunity to ask questions, challenge, put forward their views. Once a year, we have a company meeting called the Big Picture. I'll be speaking at that next month, where part of us will attend in person, part of us who can't attend in person will join remotely. And again, a really good way of involving all the organisation in what the strategic plan is for the next year and how everyone can contribute in terms of their individual roles, which we then take forward into our local teams so that we can continue the dialogue and start building out our local strategy based on what we've heard. And that sense of a sort of continuous cycle of listening, feeding in, back in, I think is really important. I think there's more to do for many organizations in inclusion. And I think it's where we start to build out strategies that perhaps even involve external stakeholders. For us, our members, our customers, they want to get involved as well. They've got the AGM as like their main opportunity to put forward questions and challenges. But I think when we're talking about other stakeholders like investors, for me, our suppliers, that's the community I look after, they want to get involved in that. And we do it through specific means. So, for example, I have a supplier survey that I run once a year. Suppliers have an opportunity to feedback on what's working, any causes for improvement. And also we involve suppliers on things like our ESG materiality assessment, asking them what's really material from an ESG point of view in their business. But I think, a lot of the time suppliers do tell us, when you're thinking about your kind of local strategies, whether that's a technology strategy, something to do with digital or cloud, or how we're planning to engage customers in branch, suppliers are saying, do be inclusive in how you engage with colleagues. Make sure you do understand their needs, because if you try and set a strategy and then apply it top down, people either don't understand it, they don't buy into it, they sort of apply it obediently, but often because they don't really understand what's behind it or they don't support it. They're not doing it in the most authentic, the most passionate, the most committed way. You don't really get the power from it that you can do. And I think increasingly I've noticed what a big difference it makes when we involve people. So over the last year, for example, we refreshed our uniform policy, so it became much more informal, less of a kind of wearing a suit and having to be very strict about hairstyles and things, to really encouraging people to bring their whole selves to work. If you want to have dyed hair or have tattoos or express yourself in different ways, that's great. And then colleagues were able to contribute their opinions on how our uniform should change. So we had much more flexibility, more, options for sort of headdresses or different styles for people who wanted to dress a certain way for religious purposes, people who felt for comfort over the course of the day, they wanted something more modular, people who didn't want gender specific uniforms. Now the uniforming just involves a much wider range, so that choice is available. And that was only really possible through lots and lots of employee engagement, discussions, forums, wearer trials, so people could try things out and say, no, that doesn't work actually in the branch environment. We need to adapt this a little bit. I noticed that works really well. And I think that, just this element about decision making is so important, but I'm conscious you probably found, whilst it's so important to engage with all colleagues, it can add time in engagements as well. Yes. And so, the firm can be reluctant. They think, well, look, we've set the strategy, let's crack on, let's deploy it. And I don't know if you found, was there a reluctance, I suppose, on the part of your sponsors to take time speaking to people? Yeah,
but I guess, similar to yourself, one of the great things about being a consultant has been you see so many different organizations. Generally, I tend to see them when they need some major change done, and let's say they're probably slightly distressed. But practically all of them, they're top corporates, so they have some overall vision that they want to put across. They always have several key principles that they want the business to live by. And it's very interesting. When I set up Finance Transformation UK, from which the magazine and the podcast was spawned, I met a guy called Simon Murphy, who runs an outfit called Culture Blocks. BLOX is how it's spelled. And what he actually was doing was he was testing the culture. Because if I walked into the head office of Coventry Building Society, I'm sure there's something that's right there in front of me that tells me what this is about.
Yes.
It gives me a feel for it. I can, you can get a sense for it. But what he said was nobody ever tests it. And I was looking at him for a minute going, I suppose you're right, actually. We can all probably stand up and recite the principles. And one of the first jobs I was given when I worked for Argos back in 2001 was to stand up at the annual conference and bring the 5 principles of Argos to life. And most of my colleagues were looking at me going, we've 5 principles? What are they? But what Simon had done was he put technology together. He built a platform basically to capture what everybody in the business felt about the principles, but how they were illustrating, how they were living them. So in my environment, I tend to go in, as I said, on more shorter term pieces of work. There's a need to change something. It's very easy to forget the softer stuff. It's very easy to push that aside and let's focus on the result. We know the strategy, we know the change, we know we've got to do something, let's crack on here. And you pay lip service to the rest. When a company is in a more business as usual, it's profitable, it's working well, all the rest of it, I think this is actually fascinating because it's almost, without using the wrong words, it's almost like a science experiment. A business most large businesses have tens of thousands of staff. So it's a working behavioral science psychology experiment into how do we get somebody to do something, which is the entire core thing of what every business is built around. We want you to buy what we sell. We want our staff to enjoy the experience of doing it. And in essence, you really have to get inside people's heads, inside their motivations and so on in order to drive that forward. But what I've always found the resistance is that the staff look at the management, the senior management, and they go, there's a gap between us. I don't entirely trust you. I don't really believe that you're sincere. It's the sincerity that they think is missing. And then the middle management that sit in the middle, they're not actually skilled and experienced enough to lead the two together. And that's where I find a lot of organizations, they have the mission statement, they have the vision, and they can put it as colorfully as the picture behind my head here, but nobody lives and breathes it. Because it's difficult to live and breathe something which is, it's not tangible. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I was so fascinated by what Simon did in actually building a platform which attempted to capture this and then feed it back to business at executive level. So, we met originally, I think, through going to one of the conferences. And what struck me about you at the time was you were running an expo for local suppliers in the region, wasn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yes,
that's what sparked the original conversation we had, and it sparked the article that you eventually wrote, because it showed to me that Coventry Building Society Well, I think what you were doing at the time was you were attempting to show the smaller business how it can play with the bigger business.
Yes.
Yeah. You'll probably describe it better than me. Do you want to just give people a flavour for what you were doing and indeed what you're still doing, because you're doing it every year, aren't you? I noticed it was on again.
Absolutely. We do each year a really big focus on increasing the access for local suppliers to find tender opportunities within our firm, and also to provide a bit of sort of coaching and education for some small business about what it's like to go through the pre-qualification experience, to put together RFPs and all of the due diligence surrounding that, which can be quite intimidating. And for us in the organization, we've designed sort of two streams of due diligence, one that is really robust and extensive for our multinationals, and for some of our micro and small businesses, a more sort of fast track way of being able to access those opportunities, because we don't want to put barriers up for small firms. You know, we know that small and local, they're not always the same, but in many cases in our organization, there's a correlation, because they're often the firms who might be doing something quite niche on a technology project. They might be people who are accessing our branches frequently in the facilities management space. And so that local access, local knowledge is so important. I think for us, increasingly, we're extending out that engagement to ensure that we include, you know, more suppliers who are owned and managed by underrepresented groups. And we're partnering with Collider, which is a platform that essentially kind of connects corporate people with firms who are, essentially part of that diverse community, so that they also can see tender opportunities as well. And I think it's so interesting what you were saying about this connection between, you know, encouraging people to do what you want them to do, having a great employee experience, and the importance of trust and credibility and belief between employees and senior managers. And I think that sort of sense of trust and relationship building is just the same for our local and small firms and corporates, you know, getting that sense that we're on the same team, we want the same things. I think, you know, in any organization, many people will say, I'm looking for really relatable leaders. You know, I'm looking for leaders who share my concerns and interests. And that is, it's never, I think, a more difficult time to do this now when we have this cost of living crisis, because in the society, we've done an awful lot to support some of our sort of lower wage employees, giving them the ability to, you know, have access to more funds to pay bills, to deal with energy bills, things like that. But I think there's always that consciousness of, you know, what else can we be doing, not just tactically in this moment because we're having a tough year, but how are we driving the whole levelling up agenda? How are we improving social mobility? How are we making sure that this gap that people can see between, you know, the more wealthy parts of UK society and those sort of people who finding themselves increasingly struggling, thinking, gosh, I've got a professional job, you know, but even that, when I'm supporting a family, is incredibly hard work. And it's part of the reason why we do a lot of work with our local and small firms, because, you know, we know that small business is the majority of business in the UK, and their health, their, you know, being able to thrive and grow and invest is so important for the wider UK economy. But those are also people in our community. You know, those are our families, you know, our people where we're living and working alongside every single day in the West Midlands. So it's a win-win. You know, if we're supporting those firms, we're supporting the region, you know, we're helping make sure that all of the smaller firms that are all about innovation, you know, some of them are startups, they're thinking about ways in which they can, you know, bring new ideas and often give us access to communities that we wouldn't normally know about. You know, perhaps if there is a firm that's disabled owned, they have a lot to tell us about how to make sure that our disabled customers kind of get a good experience. If we have black owned firms, they tell us how we can access potential customers from minority ethnic groups. So this sort of connection of, you know, giving us insights that we weren't already aware of. It's just super important. And I don't know if you find that in your work, that increasingly, you know, levelling up access, fairness is something that, you know, the organisation feels it has a responsibility to do something about.
Yeah, it's an interesting. Actually, you covered quite a lot there. I was sitting here going, at what point will I interrupt? And then I thought, no, it's not my job to interrupt. I'll let you keep talking. What I like from the podcast is, and we did this in particular with Karen and with Jason, is to give key takeaways to the listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned about 3 things there that I probably will just spell out for people listening. So first of all, could you just tell them how to spell Kaleido so they know how to go and look it up? Because that link between high-level corporate and smaller business, that's what it's bridging. That's what you were saying?
Agreed. That's exactly it. And you're spot on. It's collider, like the start of kaleidoscope. So with a K-L-A, E-I-D-A. So if you just say kaleidoscope and then do collider. And a wonderful gentleman named Jason Roberts has set that up, who had this amazing vision about how challenging it is for corporates who are interested in increasing the diversity in their suppliers, but there are so many individual organizations to access women-owned business, to access veteran-owned business. And actually, he's got a way to bring all those firms into one place, which I just think is so healthy. Yeah. And I think,
that's a learning for me. Yeah, I hadn't heard of that. I hadn't heard of Jason Roberts. I'll be looking him up and connecting with him after the podcast is done. So I've learned something from that. You tapped into an area that actually, to be honest, because we got so hung up on power cuts when I was talking to Jason Coboyne, we never got around to talking about, which is the cost of living crisis. Mm-hmm. And you said something there that resonates with me with a company that I see regularly on LinkedIn called Wages Stream. I don't know if you've come across Wages Stream. No. And if I'm right, Wages Stream facilitates staff accessing their wages early.
Interesting.
So if you're a monthly paid member of staff and you're obviously facing, high electricity, high gas bills over the course of the winter, and you need the cash, it's an early access to that. That's how it works, as I understand it. So anybody who's listening in who runs large teams and wants to actually do something practical for them to help them over the winter when everybody's stuffed for cash, look up Wages Stream. I think it's run by a guy called Peter Griffith. Don't quote me. Wages Stream, anyway, that part I can easily remember. So that was useful. So it's important, I think, that all businesses recognize what the staff are going through. So the longer term stuff that we've been talking about for the opening 10, 15 minutes, whereby can we actually start to bridge that gap between the staff, the middle managers as they all get used to the new relationship when they try to hybrid manage remotely, and the execs who set the strategy, and bridging that. But there's some practical stuff to this. That can take time, and it will always take time based on the type of business it is, how successful it is, the type of people who run it, all those type of variables. But at the moment, we're faced with real challenges. And Jason picked up for me the last day that everybody needed to be told that a scheduled power cut is not insurable. An unexpected power cut is insurable, and you better make sure you have contingency plans for January and February. But do you have any practical tips around what you're doing to ease the winter burden for the staff themselves?
We are, yes. So staff are experiencing a sort of series of payments throughout the winter period above and beyond what they'd exceed normally in their wages to support them with that, which is great. And a lot of our branches were sort of part of the Warm Spaces scheme in the UK so that people can access those during the daytime in case they're looking to, just find sort of shelter over that period of time. I think, for me, that's great to obviously get us through this period, but I'm also thinking about some of those sort of long-term issues about access and social mobility as well, how people, can really have the ability to get something different for their future or for their kids' future in a way that perhaps we enjoyed. I always think now when I'm meeting people, sort of my peers, people in their 40s and 50s, everyone comes from such a wealth of different backgrounds, a massive sort of social range. And some people sort of find themselves having completely, broken away from their origins and had the opportunity, really had sort of ability to drive success for themselves. And I think for young people, that is proving difficult in modern society. We've still got access to obviously free education, free healthcare, but there are massive inequalities in that. And it's part of the reason in Coventry Building Society, we partner with some local schools in some of the more disadvantaged areas of Coventry, and lots of volunteers. I'm part of an employability volunteering scheme, going in, providing interview, practice skills, CV writing workshops, things like that, to help young people with that transition into the workplace. And I think that's so important for me as the kind of key takeaway for this section, how firms need to look into their own regions to think about how we're improving access for people, particularly young people in the community. And as a procurement professional, be creative about what we can do. One of the things my team's doing is working, just starting a partnership with the Coventry Food Network, which essentially run social supermarkets for people who struggle to afford food in Coventry. And we're effectively donating skills. We're helping that firm, those organizations sort of buy better with some of the big sort of food retailers. And we're helping as well by some of our suppliers are very kindly offering workplace visits where sixth formers from the schools can go visit firms in technology, in professional services, and learn, what's it like to work here? What's the range of different roles? Giving them access into a workplace that probably they've never seen and nobody in their family's ever seen either. So it's a kind of little sort of way of growing aspiration, which I'm so passionate about in tech, because so many people in technology are always saying there's no skills, there's a skill shortage, we need to get more people from overseas, or we need to think about ways in which we can pay more or have more incentive schemes. And for me, part of the solution's got to be growing your own talent. And if we can get some of those young people excited about technology and interested in sort of joining that talent program, that is a surefire way of closing some of these skills gaps, rather than shrugging your shoulders and saying, oh, well, I can't get the staff.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. I even see it myself back home in Dublin, to what extent we kind of, maybe it's applicable across England and Ireland, to be honest with you, that we're not investing enough in our own schools and in our own young people, and leading by example by people like ourselves who've gone through 20 odd years of this, and going in and showing them what a career can be like, showing them, what our jobs are like, and the level of diversity that actually exists within the job. To be perfectly honest with you, there's always something different I'm doing. And I think there's a degree of, there's an onus on us to take some leadership in doing that. Because the young people themselves, they'll only play, it's like playing football, you'll only play what's in front of you. If you can see it, you'll do something about it. And if you can't see it, you're not, So it's there's some interesting stuff in there. But one of the questions I had was, we've touched upon, obviously, the last 2 years and everything that's changed. And we look into the microcosm of the business itself and how it's trying to engage greater with all levels of staff and bring them all on the journey. But are we losing, in society as a whole, I know it's a bit of an offshoot question, are we losing the younger people? Are we losing those that are in their early 20s, career stage startups, where they've only been used to working from home? So it's a nice little segue into our second point, which is about the transition from consulting to client work all of the time. Because I remember when I went to work for Deloitte, your man said to me at the interview, he says, there's your desk, put it on your back. And on Monday morning, I'm going to tell you where you're going. That's going great. So I think I've been remote working since about 2002. But do you think that we're actually in danger, that the younger people are in danger of losing something because they're not in the office environment? Whereas for the rest of us, we've been in it, stepped out, been in it, stepped out. It's like, are they losing out on something?
It's a really interesting question, Michael. I know, in your early careers, you do benefit from access to lots of people so that you can, just ask advice. You can sit there and shadow people. You can sit in on meetings and hear how other people do things and draw inspiration, whether it's, I like how they did that. I admire that. They seem to get success there, or the opposite. If you think someone's, not doing things in a way that you support, you can think, no, I don't buy into that. And I think Sure, hybrid working presents some challenges, but I also think young people do have a huge amount of initiative. And I think this is a great chance for them to kind of make the most of that and think, well, I don't have to treat my home office like a work office where you're chained to the desk. For me in my team and procurement, I encourage people, get out, go and meet different firms, go and visit your suppliers and understand how their business works, get in different industries, get to a conference and go and speak to your peers or other people. Don't sort of sit back, I suppose. I mean, I remember starting work in the late 90s. I joined British Airways on a graduate scheme, and it was just as you described, that sort of sense of a fixed workplace. For us, I was told, here's your desk. And I found that massively alien. I thought, gosh, when there was almost a set period of time where people came to work and a set period of time where people left. And in between that, it was dust balls rolling around the place. Everyone was sort of stuck in an area. I struggled with that massively. And I think we just used to have to break young people in and say, just get used to it. This is what work is. And you just sit there and you keep your head down and you get on with it. Whereas I think allowing them to design it for themselves and encourage them to be empowered and sort of figure it out, how they're going to prioritize projects and get access to the people they need to, I think it's really healthy. And I think it was, talking about that career transition, I think it was part of the reason why for me, whilst British Airways was a fabulous firm, diverse and lots of exciting things going on. When I moved into consulting, I joined KPMG after a few years with BA and had that chance, exactly as you say. You carry your desk around, you carry everything around. You're in lots of different workplaces all the time with different organizations. I really flourished in that environment. And I think lots of young people, whilst they may not suit a consulting career or some of the hardships that surround it, I think having more of personal drive is healthy.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of that transition then, so how long did you spend at KPMG?
I was there for just 3 years, and then I went to a smaller firm called ADR International, which was still in supply chain management, but more boutique. And that I liked even more because I found, it was essentially you sell the work, you come up with the solutions, you deliver it. So that autonomy was wonderful. Lots of the clients were headquartered overseas. So I was working with the likes of GE, DHL, Nokia, Japan Tobacco, firms who's sort of had a cultural home in different territories, and just gives you that ability to understand, well, people do things differently here, and they what's important to them is different. What matters to their customers is very different. So you kind of switch off that sense of complacency, I think you can have in UK PLC, where it's like, this, we've always done it this way, it's going to work. You learn that there's 1,000 different ways of sort of getting to success. And I think some of the things that can be a bit of a drag in corporate life around just, a lot of the speed of decision making can be a bit slower, lots of the governance environments and lots of the sort of, co-curricular activities that happen in corporate life that can take up a lot of time. I found that when you sweep all that away, you just have a beautiful simplicity of just sell it, deliver it, do a great job, and do it again, rinse and repeat. I guess that appealed to you, Michael, very much, just getting the job done.
Do you think there's actually 2 or 3 questions I need to go back on, but I'm reaching that stage where I sometimes forget them. Do you think actually that being a consultant and having that background, that here's Monday off to the next client and you've no idea in the UK or in Europe where you're going, prepared you better for we're not allowed to go to the office in the last 2 years?
Massively, as you say, it was normal. I wasn't used to having a workplace. I did some of my best work on flights, or whilst I was changing in Dubai or Abu Dhabi to go somewhere else, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and you just, you found a socket and you plugged your machine in and got stuff done. I really valued that. And now, when sort of organizations are saying, you know, work where you want, work how you want. And I think lots of people are saying, I don't get it. I need a structure, you know, I need a timetable. I need to know when I can access other people. And actually there's a beauty in thinking, you know, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. I can't speak to anyone. Wonderful. You know, I've got a bit of peace and quiet as opposed to being, you know, permanently available, which I think, you know, for young people, they struggle with that element of it. You know, they're in the workplace so used to social media and instant feedback and instant messaging. And they're thinking, you know, well, I want to speak to my boss right now. And I want to have a performance evaluation right now. And I want to know what correct steps I can take so that I can get promoted now. And it's kind of, you know, it's sort of trying to temper that a bit, I think, for some of our younger workers and say, you know, not everything is instant gratification. You know, some things, obviously, if you're studying like I did for, you know, a qualification with the Institute of Purchasing and Supply, it's years of activity. And there's much to be said for, you know, just trying several things, some of which are not enjoyable, not successful in some horrible places in some challenging parts of the world that, you know, I spent some time, and you certainly get to know, obviously, those places better, but you get to know yourself a lot better as well. And that's what's so important, because then when you know, oh, I'm actually quite good at that. You know, I'm pretty resilient in these circumstances. I can make it work. You know, my first day of work when I was at ADR was getting on a plane and flying to Singapore, where I spent the next few months. I didn't even go to the office. I didn't even know what it looked like. I was, you know, just straight into a client engagement. And I think, that you can learn very quickly. And I guess, you must have found exactly the same, that sense of mobility, giving you access to sort of lots of different ways of thinking and different people. You can shortcut things, can't you?
Oh, I always look back and I go, the only regret I have was that I joined Deloitte at the wrong age. I joined Deloitte as part of its experience hire program when I was 36 or so. And I remember looking at it at the time afterwards and going, I learned loads. And indeed, I still work across some of my former teammates because I do assurance work, which looks at what other consultancies do. So we still, you know, occasionally end up working together or across one another. But I learned a ferocious amount. And I always find some of the preconceptions around, even when I listen to my own clients go now, oh, we don't want to deal with a big four firm. They're all full of young fellas who, you know, they don't know what they're talking about. They've no experience. You know, they think they're smarter than you, all that kind of stuff. Well, they are intelligent. They are well educated. The big four firms don't hire idiots. They hired them for a reason. They'll acquire the experience, and they do have something to offer and to teach people. I think Deloitte's approach to it, of putting in place an experience hire program to try and blend the two, was a good idea. And I just wished I'd done it at 28 instead of 36. I remember at the time, the first time he says to me, "You're at Heathrow on Monday morning." That's grand. Yeah, what time's the flight? He says, about 6:30. I said, hold on a second. I was living in Milton Keynes. That's like, there's no point in me going to bed Sunday night, is there? But it certainly prepared you for any challenge after that. Like when everybody was complaining for the first 3 months of COVID, I was like, what's the difference? Why they're doing it here at the desk? I'm in the client's office. And now we've actually come full circle. I had a client this year. He said to me, well, we don't need you to come to the office. And I was like sitting there going, dying to get out of the house. I'm going, of course I'll be there. Oh, so give me an office. And they're like, no, there's no need. Like, we're not in anyway. And I was going, because it depends on your personality. And I mean, like most Irish people, I always manage by walking the floors. That's how I've driven people nuts by the fact that we're having a meeting by going for a walk. In fact, I get itchy feet by about 10 o'clock in the morning. If I'm not walking or running, I'm not happy. I had a lad I worked on a project with donkeys years ago at Christmas time, and he gave me walking tours of London as a Christmas present.
Brilliant.
But I'm guilty of the fact that I wouldn't switch off. When someone gives me an objective, I believe you are tasked to complete it. But mentally, most people who are, I won't say overachievers, but who are driven, they want to accomplish it. Because it's accomplished, you can move on to the next thing, or you can take a holiday or whatever, you know. So I always believed consultancy on occasion drove me mad. I actually have some great friends from starting out back in whatever 2001, 2002 that I'm still friends with, and I actually collaborate on work projects even today. And I think that that's actually one of the best endorsements you can give for somebody, because I was 52 about 2 weeks ago, and I still work with lads that I met in England back in the 90s. So consultancy teaches you a ferocious amount. And it's worth, I would say to anybody starting over, just go work for Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, whoever will hire you at 22 years of age. Spend 4 years in it, learn, just soak it all up like a sponge, and then go off and do a real job.
So true. So valuable, all those sort of boot camps you go through to be able to facilitate sessions and run workshops and make sure everybody is heard. And I think for me, the takeaway from this section is true for anyone, whether you've been a consultant or not. Just always think about how you can take those transferable skills into a new role. There's always something to learn, particularly for people who have, career changes at a later age. I've got people in my team who haven't come from supply chain backgrounds. They've come from sales or P2P, customer service. And I think that's wonderful. You can learn the technical skills, but if the right behaviors are there about wanting to own things, drive things forward, being obsessed with the customer and always focused on the deliverable, that's amazing. And I think that's a wonderful thing about where we are at the moment in the world, is that it's normal to change function and to change interest. It's good for people.
I'd say, to be honest with you, for the last 2 years since COVID started, and I founded the brand of Finance Transformation UK and the magazine and all the rest of it, I've been embarked on like a sideline project of learning how to become a marketeer. And I get teased by the real marketing people, just accountants. Like, I'm not, like, I can learn something, I can learn something new. So you're learning this stuff, even though I'm knocking on. I don't think I'll make a chief marketing officer, but who knows?
I don't know. No, it's wonderful. Michael, should we tackle the tricky one? Should we come to
we'll get to that we'll get to that in just a second, because there was still 2 or 3 things you said going through this. I really need a board. I need somebody over there going, Michael, you need to go back and ask her this question here. There was 1 or 2 things you touched upon, and it actually links through to some of the stuff I was discussing with Jason. Supplier take on. Okay, and particularly small suppliers. So this is the 2nd of December. On the 6th of December, I'm going to the House of Lords to meet the AP Association, who are putting on an event with Terry Corby. I think I'm always getting his name wrong. Terry Corby, the Good Business Pays. So it's all about getting small suppliers paid. And I think the Small Business Commissioner, who's also based in the West Midlands, will be the keynote speaker at 10 o'clock on the 6th. And I see this all the time, because I've ran large finance shared service centres, and to be honest with you, the small suppliers are down here when it comes to the payment run. It's the other stuff that are beating you over the head. What are you doing practically on the ground that encourages those small suppliers to believe in Coventry Building Society will get paid? First of all, we get paid on time, which is the number one thing, and then therefore they'll want to trade with you. How are you finding that? What do you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, first of all, we have 30 days payment terms, which makes it appealing for smaller firms to work
across the piece.
Yeah, it's across the piece for all firms, and for smaller businesses, I think that is especially attractive for their cash flow. We're running multiple payment runs, so that's a great promise that they see. I think what we then need to do is make sure that promise is followed up, and that is a lot about behaviours in the business. One of the things I'll be introducing over the next 6 months, you'll laugh when you know that we haven't got to it yet, but it's a no PO, no pay policy. At the moment, we do have many invoices coming in without POs associated with them. So there's a massive change to communicate that out to our requisitioners in the business and to our suppliers, let them know it's coming, have a very long lead in, so we get all the things in place and nobody feels, anxious when that kicks in. And it's part of the reason why, next year we'll be aiming to join the UK Prompt Payment Code. At the moment, we don't meet the criteria because we're not paying 95% of businesses with less than 50 employees within 30 days, and that we've got to get better on that. So our aspiration is to set that in place, but we notice again it's behaviours that can make that challenging when perhaps an invoice comes into the business. Perhaps the work is sort of partially complete, and we need to sort of make a call then about whether it's part receipted, do we need to send it back to the supplier? What we can't do is sit on it. We know there's a lot of hoarding of invoices that goes on where people can be reluctant just to call it and say, yes, it's approved, it's agreed. We don't have sort of an automatic match that gets suppliers paid. And so there's a massive opportunity next year when we swap out our general ledger. We'll be working with Workday from April as our mechanism for paying suppliers. And that is where I'll be introducing several new approaches to payment so that we can, really speed that up for our smaller firms. And what we find is actually, on the whole, the vast majority of our small businesses get paid in much less than 30 days, but it's the outliers that, create some challenges. And I think, sometimes that's supplier behavior as well, sending us backdated invoices or again, holding on to invoices for a long period of time. So it's, there's got to be a convergence where we work in partnership with all of our suppliers to get this done.
Okay. So the yes/no question, would you support legislation for suppliers to be paid on time? Small businesses.
I would. Yes, absolutely. Everybody knows it's the right thing to do, but right now there's always something else more important for people to be doing. And I think if they know it's not a choice, it's a compulsion. Yeah, I absolutely support it.
Yeah. To be honest, that's my own experience. When they introduced the Cabinet Office duty to report on payment statistics there about 3 or 4 years ago, all of a sudden the CFO was interested.
Yeah. Okay.
And then it was like, are we doing this? Where are we? What's our scores on the doors? Are we going to be in the newspaper every 6 months when someone says, someone's not up to snuff? So I actually think the only way to ensure the behaviour is enforced is legislation. And I deal with an awful lot of real small suppliers in putting the magazine together and so on and so forth. And I pay them the day that they send me the bill. Mm-hmm. I have a very simple attitude to this, which is, if you've done the work, well, here's the money. Okay. You wouldn't walk into Tesco's and go, give me a trolley load of food, and walk out the door and go, I'll pay you in 30 days. You'd be arrested. Okay. So I actually think that the very first step in legislation should be for service-based industries where the task has been done. It's not necessarily delivery of goods that are going to go part of your manufacturing process. Yes. Services, I do a job for you, you get paid within 7 days. No messing. And we all know the capability is there to do it, and it needs a push. Yeah, it needs a little something to make it work. So we have, I think, done about just over 45 minutes. I don't think I'll ever get one of these podcasts to be done in under 60. I'm still struggling with the lighting, the fact that the young fella next door is playing football off the wall outside. I'm going to kill him when this is finished. And the sound better not be being picked up. Diversity and inclusion. What's it really like on the front line? Is it just, as I saw somebody post in a poll on LinkedIn the other day, is it something that everybody pussyfoots around, doesn't really get it, or pays lip service to it? Like, what's it really feel like? What would make a difference in it?
It's it's a massive, massive topic. Something that I think is every firm is super laser focused on it. We were probably quite late to the party in Coventry Building Society, really, starting to pick this up very seriously a couple of years ago, like a lot of firms did after the George Floyd murder, but increasingly just with more colleagues saying, I want more of a voice and I want to be able to celebrate who I am at work as well. And so I think, just all of that, meant that there's increased focus. Now, we've done a lot in the organisation. When we signed the Race at Work Charter last year, a lot of that's about making sure that every employee has access to, good career progression. So we've got lots of great programs for people at all different stages of their career. And we introduced a new ethnicity career development program for Black and Asian colleagues so that we could increase representation and have more people of colour at manager level and above in the firm, which is great. We've got loads more networks available now, a rainbow network. I founded a Black network with several African and Caribbean colleagues in the society for people who just want, a safe space to know that you can go and speak to people, you won't be judged, they know exactly what you're talking about, they've had the same lived experiences as you, and we can think about how we can increase representation, impact, visibility of Black people inside and outside the workplace, increase that sort of sense of aspiration for young people who think, I'm not sure, financial services, that's not for brown faces. We want to sort of dispel some of those myths. So I think there's an awful lot going on, but I think it can make you nervous if it does feel a bit knee-jerk and you do think, gosh, if there's a sort of an incident in the press about race, firms sort of feel this need to overcompensate a bit and sort of make such a massive focus on what they're doing that there's so many brown faces in adverts. There's so much kind of sense of pushing forward underrepresented groups that it doesn't feel authentic. And then that disenfranchises other people thinking, well, hang on, I'm all for kind of racial reckoning and fairness and making sure that nobody's experiencing headwinds. Everybody's got the same sort of support around us, but it can't be artificial. And I think all people of colour support that. Nobody wants to be, given a job on a quota or as a kind of special, sort of place. It's got to be merit-based.
Right. Okay. All right, cool. And is there during the course of your career, are there any particular challenges that you've faced or experienced?
Yeah, I think so. I think probably, particularly as the conversation evolves, everybody I think looks back and thinks, I understand why I experienced a challenge. I remember when I was at college, I was really lucky when I was young. I sort of got a scholarship to go to an independent school at sixth form, and they sponsored me and supported me where I was able to go to Oxford University, which was a tremendous privilege and insight. And spaces like that obviously are spaces of privilege. There are lots and lots of people there who have, had an amazing background and start in life, but there's just as many people, international students or people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And there I was part of an access scheme where me and Black colleagues went into inner city schools around London and Oxford to kind of talk about Oxford and talk to young people about the sorts of things that they might be doing to prepare themselves for application and just make sure that those, the state sector really, really felt empowered to kind of, sort of prepare themselves. And many young people did exactly that. Loads and loads of bright people who found themselves at Oxford and Cambridge as a result of the Access programme. When I joined the workplace, it just didn't really exist. Nobody was talking about diversity and inclusion. There weren't really that many special accommodations, even for disabled colleagues. That's relatively new. So, I've been in plenty of workplaces where people in wheelchairs or people who were hard of hearing or partially sighted just couldn't really get around. They sort of had to be sort of specially supported, and that's not cool, if just professional people can't access the workplace. So I think that, we're being much more intentional about it now, really making sure, everybody should feel as if there's a space for them here. Nobody should be encountering bullying, harassment, inappropriate language in the workplace. We've got to make sure that we've got really welcoming spaces. But I think there are still challenges for underrepresented groups where they, you will find yourself as, for me, the only Black person in a room, in a group of professionals as part of a senior leadership team, in a whole organization sometimes, that might be the case, that you're the only sort of different person. I think there's still some work to do probably in continuing this journey of increasing representation that I think it can be a challenge. For me, I'm sort of mixed race, a British father, a mother from the Caribbean, she's from the Bahamas. And I think for anyone who's of Caribbean descent, they might find themselves either as part of or the children or grandchildren of kind of a Windrush generation. Yeah. And, a lot of the challenges from that generation can get sort of baked into family sort of lore and legacy, I suppose, what it might have been like, coming to London in the 40s and 50s and experiencing some hostility, challenges finding, accommodation, challenges getting into certain jobs when jobs were posted as, jobs for whites only. And that can sort of create a certain caution and a certain reluctance that then is sort of handed down multi-generationally. And young people feel, well, I'm not really welcome in that space. And, I'm probably going to encounter some difficulties in the workplace. And I think, probably, Michael, you can say exactly the same, because I know for the Irish community, it was a parallel experience at that time.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I first came to England in 1996 or so, I would say the Irish professionals weren't as prevalent as they are today. And indeed, just watching British society evolve, I wouldn't necessarily say as an outsider, since I've lived and worked in it for most of the last 25 years, but as a sort of detached outsider, should we say, since I've always been a proud Irishman, is that I've seen how all levels of society have changed. Even if you look at the diversity within the English football team, within all the British athletics teams, and indeed within the composition of the government itself.
Yes.
As you watch it from what probably was possibly an all-white government under Margaret Thatcher to what's under Rishi Sunak today. And that's all progress, it's all change, it's all, that's all good to see. I'm always fascinated by the fact that the Irish have decided, for whatever reason, despite the fact that we've become professionally successful within the UK, we don't seem to have any interest in being politically involved in it. There are no Irish people, or there's no serious Irish people actually involved in attempting to either be an MP or take it on from there and be part of the cabinet and actually have a political career. And I'm not really sure why that is, because the Scots do it, the Welsh do it. I know they have their separate assemblies, but they all sit in Westminster as well. And obviously there's the history between the two countries and so on and so forth and all that kind of stuff. But I would say, in terms of how we're viewed an awful lot differently to how we were originally viewed back in the 90s when I first went. I guess one of the questions, or the last question I had for you was, what would you are a role model for your own background. If we were to fast forward 10 years, what would success in the diversity inclusion space, what would it look like? What would be the different factor that's there?
Gosh, so many elements. I think just a real confidence, I think, that for anyone in an underrepresented group, they have just the same ability to get a job, to progress in that role, to feel themselves fitting in the workplace and not feeling othered, not feeling like, I'm going to go and have a sort of bantery conversation with someone, but I won't include those people because they might be a bit sensitive. I'm not sure how they're going to react. Just that real sense of involvement and inclusion. And whilst I'm a big supporter of kind of, talent programs specifically for underrepresented groups, they won't succeed unless the environment of the organization changes around it. Those people will just find themselves in a rarefied environment, spat back into the same kind of place they're in to start with, where, people are still promoting and supporting those who look and sound and think like them. And, perhaps we don't have that sense of, something different. Great. Yeah. What do you think? Yeah. How would you approach this? I think it's just that point about, moving away from tolerance. I think, where we've come from, like, I'm not too sure if I like this mixture and this composition of society, but I'll tolerate it, to actually think, it's a good thing. That is who we are as Britons. We're, we're Vikings, we're Normans, we're Romans, we're a whole mixture. And actually let's sort of continue to embrace that and make sure that when we're just not leaving people behind, just like when we started this conversation and we were talking, effectively there, a lot when I was talking about sort of social mobility, a lot of that is in white working class neighborhoods. Let's not leave those folks behind in exactly the same way as not leaving, underrepresented groups behind as well. I think, making sure you're visible is important, but for firms not to be complacent and not to think, oh, that's fine. There's a brown face there now. Job done. Tick. Yeah. It's about, it's not about that one person. I remember sort of attending interviews when I was a young professional. And if you were in a sort of room of candidates, if you saw other brown faces, you'd never think, I'm here sort of competing against this whole room. It's me versus that person, because there's only one space for a minority ethnic group, if at all. They're only going to take one of us. And so, it's just a case of which of the two is going to make it through to the final round. And I'd like it so that nobody's thinking that anymore. They're walking into a room and thinking, there's just a bunch of people with different merits and experiences and what they look like, or what their sexuality is, or what their gender is, or anything about their personal experience is irrelevant.
Yeah. Well, I think, to be fair to you, you've gone a long way to helping that during the course of your own career. So good enough reason for you to continue to be a role model for the next 10, 15 years.
I hope so.
Yeah. Okay, I think I might almost just about have done this in under 60 minutes. I think to anybody listening to the third of these podcasts, having listened to Karen and to Jason, I'm attempting to do them a little bit quicker. But if somebody has something interesting to say, why would I stop them? What's the point? And if you give it an extra 10 minutes to listen, then hopefully you learn something. So the challenges of doing the podcasts are still the same. The lighting arrangement of my home, for those of you watching this in video podcast, is still not brilliant. We do hope in January to get ourselves into a TV studio and do a day's filming with several guests. The guests being individually interviewed, and indeed the guests being panel interviewed so that they can talk amongst themselves. So that's the aim in January. You're welcome to listen to the podcast on Spotify. It's The Leaders Interview with Michael Ryan. Generally, it's all in blue. And you're welcome to watch it on YouTube, allowing for the background lighting. You'll find it on our YouTube page, Finance Transformation UK. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching. I hope you tune into the next one. I hope you learned something, because you now know a little bit more about what the S is in ESG. I hope you learned something about what it's like to be a consultant. And I hope you have a greater appreciation of the challenges that minorities face. And indeed, that when we're having this conversation in a couple of years' time, there'll be no such thing as minorities. We will all just be, one great big, and we take it from there. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you very much for watching.